Hello, everyone. This is Patrick Hayes with Redeeming Life Ministries in Stanton, Virginia. And this is our Bible study. We've been looking at what I call the 12 wisdoms of Solomon. And last week, we went over the first three of those wisdoms, which in Hebrew, if that matters, are called Chokmah, that's wisdom itself. The next one is Musar, willingness to be corrected. Some people are visited by wisdom, but they don't go on to that second one. They're not willing to take correction. And the third one we looked at last week was strange Hebrew word, binah, if I'm pronouncing it correctly, and it means understanding. So let me just kind of go over that again. I'm using a series of stories I've written about one of Solomon's sailors who began as a young 15-year-old boy from the hills and had never seen water before in any large body of water. But he was conscripted to join a workforce that brought him to the sea. And when he began to see, he had never seen boats or ships. I have him saying he had never even tasted fish before. And completely ignorant of all this, when he saw the life of sailors, Phoenician sailors, by the way, because there were no Israelite sailors. King Solomon had decided, you know, Israel's a narrow strip of land, but it touches two oceans. All along this side is the Mediterranean, but it's ruled by the navies of the Phoenicians and the Egyptians. And down here at the tip, we have a very tiny connection to the Red Sea. And since we have coasts on two oceans, we should get into the naval trade business. Now, this was early on in Solomon's reign, and building the navy and training sailors who were Israelites to even become shipbuilders and officers in this proposed navy was quite an undertaking, since they had no culture for it. They had no history of it, no background of it, no experience in it. And Solomon wanting to get this done is one of the main things that drew him in an affinity with both Egypt, which was a seafaring nation, and Solomon made a trade pact with Pharaoh of Egypt, and also made an affinity with Hiram, the king of Tyre. These are Phoenician people, the Tyrians. And so that's the background of the stories I'm telling. 12 stories related by a sailor who is now an older man, many years older. It's Solomon's last year as king, though nobody realizes that yet. The Navy has been a success for over 25 years. It's actually been working for close to 30, but it's finally become successful as a trade nation and respected by other nations that are on the high seas. And Solomon wants to teach his 12 wisdoms, so he chooses this officer who had come up as a little nobody who had never even learned to swim before, never seen enough water to swim in, and how he will become a great sea captain of Israel. And I have him telling his story in 12 sections, each one describing a certain aspect of one of the wisdoms, the 12 wisdoms that Solomon lays out. Now, I don't want to complexify things for you, but that's the reason I repeat this stuff as we go along. If you want to read the 12 wisdoms as Solomon lists them, they are in Proverbs chapter 1, verses 2 through 6. And if you just read it in English, he's just saying, well, to know wisdom and understanding and instruction, and they sound like very similar words. But if we looked at them in Hebrew, as I'm pointing out, we find that these are 12 very different aspects of erudition, or learning good behavior, good thinking, having a good influence, becoming a wise person. Now, if you couple that with so many other proverbs, Solomon speaks about a wise man versus a naive man, or an over-talking person, or an angry man. With an angry man, I have nothing to do but find a man of wisdom. And he's talking about all these different kinds of wisdom that contrast to bad behaviors we might otherwise have if the Holy Ghost didn't come into our lives and begin to teach us wisdom. So, last week I had the sailor tell the story of when he was a young man and wisdom came to him. It was just an epiphany. He didn't know what wisdom was. He just saw these ships and he says, that's a journey I want to be on. I want to learn what they can teach me. It's kind of like being born again in a sense, saying goodbye to the old life and embracing an unknown but promising new life, new way of life, a new journey. That probably happened to you if you can remember when you became born again. I'm going to say goodbye to the old and embrace the new and see where it takes me. So that's wisdom itself, or chokmah. And the next little parable we told last week was where he was assigned to a crew chopping down trees to make lumber for timber for boats that they wanted to build. And this guy, he didn't even know how to use an axe or sharpen an axe. And this was musar, correction. He had a hard teacher fussing at him a lot, putting him down. Correction is not always pleasant. It can be very harsh. God might see to it when you pray and say, God, teach me to be corrected. Teach me to be willing. God says, all right, I'll begin by putting a real monster over you and see how you can take those kind of corrections. And in my story, the man that's correcting the young man and many other young Israelite men, he's a Zidonian, and he not only corrects them, but he does it with sarcasm and with bitterness and with much prejudice. Not everybody God puts you under is going to be an angel. I can tell you that much. You're going to have some difficult people to deal with on your pathway of learning wisdom. But that's how you learn wisdom. I see people, they never settle down in a single church. They'll come for a year and say, I thought this is where God wanted me to come, but I've decided, I don't like what the pastor said about this, that, or the other, and I'm leaving. I'll go find another. Well, we knew that was coming because a year ago when you came to us, you told us you had been to 20 different churches and hadn't found a good one yet. So you're in a habit of running every time somebody offers some kind of correction to your life. You want to go somewhere else. Well, that's not musar. That's not the willingness to be corrected. And then in my third story, he was moved up from simply cutting down trees in the mountains. Well, he's moved down to the coast, but it's actually up in potential, because now he's being taught to turn those tree logs that he and his friends have cut down. He's put under a master instruction who teaches him how to turn that wood into smooth planks of the right shape. Now, these people didn't have any table saws. They didn't have any jigsaws. They certainly didn't have any chainsaws. Everything is done by hard, careful handwork. And in this, the young man began to gain what we call bina, or understanding, as he learns the different shapes of this work, of producing a product, this timber that can be used in building the most mysterious thing on the earth at that time, and that's a large sailing ship. And very few people knew the craft of the shipwright. So after talking about attaining an understanding. By the way, understanding or bina also means if you've got it within you, then you now begin to gain internal correction. And less do you need to be corrected by someone on the outside. People they'll still do it. But you've already worked on correcting yourself. You know, there was a time when David did something. He cut off King Saul's, the hem of his skirt so he could hold it up the next day to prove that he had been there and hadn't killed Saul, and that he had actually kept his nephew Abishai from killing Saul. But to cut off the back of the skirt, David, as he went away late that night from Saul's sleeping form, the Bible says his heart smote him. David's heart smote him. That's a disgraceful thing to have done to the figure of a king. And this is an internal correction. Does your heart ever smite you for something? Do you ever get an internal correction that says, don't ever do that again? And it also makes you want to yell out about yourself. Oh God, why did I say that? Why did I act that way? Why did I do those things? Bina takes musar. Musar is correction. Bina is understanding. It takes correction and internalizes correction inside of you. We can call this bina, or understanding, an internalization of correction. Now, as we go down this list of wisdoms, you'll find fewer and fewer people that you know of that you can say has that. We might think of a lot of people that have wisdom. Maybe only 70% of them demonstrate any kind of understanding or are willing to be corrected. And those that have internal correction, bina, maybe half of that number. Among the people you know in your life that you would look at them and say, and we'll find that this narrows down until finally, of a whole community of people, maybe only one person at the end will be a man or a woman of takbula, attaining the 12th wisdom, being recognized by everyone as a wise counselor. So this is a trip that many start. Sadly, not that many finish it. That doesn't mean they're going to hell or they're bad or anything, but it's just human nature. Solomon listens to the third story the sailor tells, and he talks about those three: Hokmah, Musar, and then Beina. And Solomon speaks. Now, the scene is, this is Solomon's theater where he receives the kings of the earth around a great table once a year, I think, and he has discussions with them, and they come to hear the wisdom that God has put in him and to hear his teachings concerning the name of the Lord. These are foreign people, pagans or semi-pagans, but they come to hear Solomon. So Solomon adds, those three assets might seem enough for most men: Hokmah, Musar, and Beina. You, however, my sailor, proceeded further. You hadn't personally come to my attention yet, Solomon says, but I had requested for the Zidonians and Tyrians to find such Israelite men as could learn the whole of seafaring, from the basic tools of the shipwright to the construction of ships, then to their better design, then to their navigation, and onward to the command of a trade fleet. I, Solomon, did not want to appoint sea officers in my navy who did not know everything about ships. After 5 years, I was informed that Israel had produced but a few dozen men who were considerable in their path toward my hopes. And so Solomon gestures with his underturned right hand. Go on, sailor, and tell us about Sakal, the fourth wisdom, the wisdom of the voyage. Now, Sakal means prudence, and it's listed that way in your King James. It's the fourth wisdom. All right, my king, we had laid the keel for another ship commissioned for Israel. The master was reviewing my skill of ribbing and how to select and shape a particular curve of hardwood for a hull, when word came that I was to report to the captain of a large Tyrian ship. They were putting together an Israelite crew to learn from the Tyrian crew the mysteries of actually sailing on an open voyage. I was given the choice either to continue gaining a shipwright's skill, working with wood and learning to build ships, or to go out and learn the lore of the sea. Now, it's one thing to learn how to build a boat. It's another thing to get out there and learn what the ocean is like that you want to put that boat on. And so, although I was enamored, he says, of my work at the carver's table, the lure of the waves was great upon me. After a night of deliberation, I reported to the Tyrian officer who was sizing up our Israelite men for training. Out of many candidates, only 12 would go. I was chosen to be one of them. Our King Solomon speaks of Chokmah as Lady Wisdom. For me, her embodiment was in that ship from the moment I set foot on her planking. Oh, I already knew the ship well in terms of her makeup, for I had helped to build 20 ships similar to her. I knew them on land, though. What I did not know, though I had heard of it, was how each ship displays her own character on the sea, makes her own subtle relationship with the wind and waves. Now, I don't know how far I'll get in my reading tonight, but let me stop and preach to you just a few facts of life here. Here's a guy who's been working for 5 years, and they build 5 ships a year where he's been working. He has helped produce 25 ships, all by the same blueprint, all with the same tools, all following the same method of, this was their assembly line, 25 ships in 5 years, and they're identical. And yet he's now saying, I was to learn that each one of them would behave differently on the sea, depending on a lot of different factors, but each ship would have her own personality. Let's compare a ship to a church. How many churches are there in Augusta County here in Virginia? I do not know, but I guarantee you every one of them is individual and particular. No two are alike. Anytime we try to make them all alike, let's form a big denomination and make sure everybody dresses the same, talks the same, smells the same, tastes the same. Let's make sure they all sing exactly the same songs and say amen at the same moments throughout, and have all the preachers of all these churches preach exactly the same thing. In fact, I've been involved with different groups where the guy in charge of the group sends out the sermon. He wants all of the pastors around the country to preach that same sermon on a particular Sunday. And everything's got to be the same. Well, what happens to that? Well, I'm not saying those churches fall apart, but that sameness begins to fall apart. Sounds like a good idea at first, but after a while, you're going to learn the people who choose to attend this church, they choose for a particular set of distinctives. People who choose to attend that church over there have their own set of distinctives. And that's why they choose to gather around that pastor. We're all preaching out of the same book, and we're following the same model. These churches ought to be serving the same God in the same way, but they're each going to be individual in the way they work. And I'm just putting that in there. It's a wisdom our young sailor is learning already. From the moment he puts his foot on the ship, this understanding comes to him. I felt the ship moving under my feet. I sensed that she, the ship, had a personality born for her marriage to the sea. In the ship's motion, Hokmah was personified. In the ship's demands, Musar was essential. In her subtleties, Bi'ina, or understanding, was realized. And now, from her officers, Sakal, the fourth wisdom, was to be learned. I saluted the captain and was sent to report to the ensign. He explained my duties. Little in my years at the docks had prepared me for what I was about to undertake. He walked me and the other trainees, all Israelites, about the deck for orientation. This ship, the ensign barked, ensign barked. And by the way, the word ensign, are you familiar with that word? It's a third officer on a ship in the Navy. There's the captain, and then there's the first mate, and then there's the ensign. The word ensign is spelled E-N-S-I-G-N. And it comes from the Latin word for teacher. Even in Spanish, the word for to teach is enseñar, to be an ensign. And so the ensign explained to me my duties. This ship, he barks, is in many ways like all others you may know of. But forget the others. For you, she must not be any ship. She is your ship. Get to know her. She'll love them who love her, and she'll respond best to them who love her most. She alone will teach you about herself, how she anchors at mooring, how she responds to winds in her sails and currents under her keel. From me, you'll learn each of these dozens of tarred ropes. You see it coming down along the side to the gunwales from high up in the masts. Some of them turn booms or sprits. Some furl or unfurl sails. Some are stays that guy the masts. You'll know them better than you know your mother's faces, boys. We will be seeking speed. Setting sails with these lines, we'll manage the drive of the ship, whether we catch headwinds, tailwinds, or crosswinds, in varying currents and in high or low seas. You'll know how to lay your hands on the right line at command, to loosen and hold it, or to tighten it and tie it off as expected, and to do it quickly. You'll do it in the blind dark. You'll do it in the nightmare storm and in the confusion of battle. You'll know the right thing to do at the right moment without having to be told, but you'll be told anyway. She's a complex ship. You'll learn the lady's ways. Every detail is important. I'll quiz and drill you until you can do them in your sleep, and do not let me catch you sleeping. If you learn better than others, you might be singled out to study more things. The captain's own skills, reading the stars and the sun to reckon our course and position, predicting the weather by the winds, smell, and the sea's color, estimating distance and speed, and much more. You'll talk to the moon and to the rain, and they'll tell you their secrets. You'll become a brother to seagulls and flying fishes. You'll learn from porpoises and whales. Captain wants you each to know how to do his job if ever called upon. So be learners. If you're trustworthy and alert, you'll learn navigation from dead reckoning, the reading of the charts and the lay of our voyage. Charts are incomplete, so we'll be discovering new details for the map makers. If you are astute, you'll be set to the steerage and handle the helm and learn the play of the rudder against the sea and how to coax the lady onward in conflicting winds. As for our trek, get this in your head. No two voyages are the same. You may have talked to someone who has made this crossing. I can tell you, your story will be different from his. Get yourself prepared for any eventuality and stay alert. He talked on. My brain was spinning. How could I remember all this? I glanced around at my fellows. They were also peeking at one another. One rolled his eyes. Another shrugged and smirked. The man next to me winked and whispered, "Learn more than my share? Not me. I'll do just what I've signed on for and no more. I'll be no captain's monkey. Why should I learn to do the captain's job for him? Let him do his work and I'll do mine, is what I say." I did not respond. I noticed only one or two had turned their eyes back to the ensign. The rest were looking around. I refocused on the ensign just as he spun around to look straight at me. "Now, before you go below to stow your stuff, and you'll do it quickly, let me tell you about the captain. There's not another like him. The old man is demanding, but fair. I've shipped with him many a year, and I can tell you he's not above doing what each of you will do. And he is willing for each man to learn to do what he does. He'll be watching you all as I will." He went on to explain the chain of command, the expected ethics of behavior aboard ship, the proper response to authority, and the rewards and penalties for obedience and alertness, or for disobedience, insolence, and negligence. As we were dismissed to go below, I realized I must now discard much of what I thought I knew. I looked around the cabin and at the men about me. Some silently arranged their belongings. Some griped and laughed or expressed like or dislike for the ensign. I shook hands with each of them and stowed my bag. I was the first to report topside just as the first mate called for deck assembly. I settled my mind to learn all I could, to relish the pleasures and perils of the voyage, to meet the expectations of the captain, to answer the demands of the ship, and to discern the personalities of my fellow sailors. "Commander," says King Solomon, "so the ship itself was to become your lady, just as Hokmah, Lady Hokmah, is to me the lady. I think a ship in its voyage must become identical. The ship is meaningless without its voyage, and the voyage is impossible without the ship. In the same way, wisdom is identical to the journey of life. Wisdom is but folly if it is static, unused, a ship forever moored. Wisdom must move on toward a goal in life. The journey in life isn't possible without wisdom. Life must be all about wisdom, and wisdom all about living. The acumen acquired in the voyage is the sakal that I want you to teach us about. Please continue." "Yes, my king," says the sailor. I'll stop right here before I read the rest of this on sakal. Anybody got any comments, complaints, arguments, disagreements? Well, I'll accept comments, and somebody wants to add something or ask a question or give more information, just a moment. But I do not accept disagreements, not while we're in class. If you have a disagreement, I'll accept it later. Just write it on the back of a $20 bill and mail it to me, and then I'll respond to you. Yes, Dan. Sakal. I take the spelling from Strong's Concordance. S-A-K-A-L. Sakal. Yeah, and it means the prudence to learn from everything around you on a voyage. So he goes on a little bit more about this. Is this interesting? You brought your friend with you tonight. I was afraid I bored you to death last week reading, and now you brought somebody else. And I know what you told her. You have never been bored like you're going to be bored before. Now you're going to know all about boredom. Well, I've got to see this. Okay, here we go. Well, sirs, the ship was still at anchor when the ensign barked out his orders to the new crew, outlining the rules. Submission to authority is essential on a sea voyage. Say goodbye to the pleasures of the land and its freedoms. You've signed on for a long trek, and your life is no longer your own. You belong now to me and to the captain. Dispense with all your notions about yourselves and the darling things your mothers and sweethearts told you. Now let's get to it, you lousy lot of lounging landsmen. And he would often rebuke us for what he called our insolent smirks, for any look of impudence in our eyes, for any swagger in our walk. He ordered a bit of work and immediately dressed me down for not doing it quickly enough or with the wrong attitude. He was on my back personally, finding fault with everything about me. I smoldered inwardly. I could do nothing well enough. Even when I was right, I was wrong. If it were like this when the ship was still at anchor, how would it be at sea? This was Musar all over again, correction. The others felt the same, each convinced of the ensign's hatred. But of course, it was his job to discern which of us might be candidates to become leaders. Conflict reveals character. He watched each of us carefully for our reactions to his harassments. He worked to uncover any individuality, any arrogant self-pride, lazy ways, apathy, or inattention to detail. He knew that his every word was hateful to me. Did I whisper complaints to other crewmen? Did I wince at unreasonable demands? Would I have the self-control to knuckle under and do my duty without resentment? He had to make each of us into a disciplined sailor who would perform well under the most trying of circumstances. If he did not beat us into shape now, any one of us might prove disastrous to the whole ship and its mission during some turmoil. I never forgot those formative 2 days at anchor, those initial harsh instructions, my introduction to the ship. But at last, on the 3rd day, the order came to weigh anchor. I was grouped with men who hauled and coiled the heavy anchor rope and nested the ponderous hook in its chocks. Our next anchor drop should be at the destination point, far across the Mediterranean. Though the anchor might be used at sea if repairs became necessary, or if the crew were to require corrections. Well, we got underway on the outgoing tide. Our sails unfurled to a sweet tailwind that drove us running through the bay and onto the wide sea. The land diminished aft and disappeared. The gulls flapped about the masts and returned shoreward. Dolphins and flying fish, the ship's new escorts, sprinted at the bow. We slid into white-capped waves and empty horizons. The marker man threw his weighted and knotted line for the last time and announced that we had cleared the shelf. The seafloor was now unfathomable. Mixed feelings settled over us. There was a kind of happy abandon, exhilaration at setting out into the unknown, the sense of adventure. But there was also the weird soberness a first-time sailor feels, for he now relies upon nothing more than an assemblage of groaning timbers and his trust in the unknown God or unseen God. It is overpowering. The ship that had seemed so durable at port now seemed but a child's toy hurled out upon the ocean that at its own whim and at any moment might pull it into its depths. We entered grayer water. The sea began to churn at us. The tiller kicked hard in the steersman's hands. He called his mate to help him hold it. The captain called for full sail. The first officer shouted, "All hands on deck!" The ensign sent us to our places aloft in the rigging. A fine day in a rolling pitch with a stiff breeze, just right for a drill in sail setting. Again and again he sent me, along with others, climbing to furl or unfurl a particular sail, gathering and releasing canvas, securing sheet lines, inspecting and greasing boom pivots, or walking the bowsprit over the tossing foresea to spread the foresail. By morning's end, I had scurried up and down each mast rigging many times, walked each boom, and slid down each stay line. When we were called in for mess, my hands were raw, my cheeks were chafed, my knuckles and knees ached and stiffened. Suddenly, we lurched a port, swinging sharply against a shifting wind. We left our food and rushed up to deck. The sails slackened. The ensign called for a tack turn. That is, the wind's been sending you one way straight on, but now that stops, and there's a new wind coming from the side. The ship has to turn and tighten its sails to a different angle to catch this new wind, and turns slightly to see if the new wind, it's called tacking. This is a tack turn. A man had to know his place and cordage. 2 halyard lines were tied at the end of my boom. One pulled aft, the other pulled fore. My partner across deck handled 2 halyards for swinging the boom to his side. At signal, I unwrapped both line ends from their cleats. He did the same simultaneously. Together we swung the high boom from port to starboard angle and rewrapped the line ends to the cleats. 2 men made the same maneuver on the other boom, the other mast ahead of us. All sails billowed and filled together from their masts. It was a job well done, we thought, until the ensign began stalking up and down the deck, reprimanding the whole crew for slowness and clumsiness. The next turn would have to be brought about in half the time and with greater precision. We repeated the turnings with each shift of the wind. I began to get a feel for the suppleness of the vessel, her draft in varying seas, her lightness or drag in turnabout, her strain under full sail, her bow pitch slapping against surging waves, every creak and groan of her timbers. You ever heard the expression, "shiver me timbers"? That comes from the old days of men living on wooden ships. There's nothing that doesn't creak, and there is no place to sleep where things don't go bump in the night. So I wanted to get that thing of shivering timbers. That became, for me, the ship's language of plea or approval, the way the lady would speak to me as one of her sailors and lovers. I learned the subtle tensions of sail tug against rudder plane. I acquired accuracy in letting out or taking in sail to match wind tension for best speed and tight drive. It was what no ensign could teach me with words. I found for myself how the ship moved tacking, keeping with the cleanest winds along her course. I got insight from experience. Soon, the ensign found that he could trust me to do the right thing without We were about 7 days out when the captain asked his navigator to train an apprentice from the Israelite crew. The ensign took me and 3 others aside. Apart from your ordinary duties, but it'll offer a promotion chance to the man who learns it well. One of my companions knew something of astronomy. Now, what they're talking about is learning 15 centuries before the compass is invented. How do you navigate? If you know what month it is and where the sun should be rising, along the horizon, it rises over here some parts of the year and rises over here other parts of the year, then you'll know the angle of the sun. And if it rose that way, it's going to set that way. And you'll be able to tell time if you know what day it is and which way the sun's headed, because it makes a different arc every day. We just say east to west, but it's degrees off each day. It goes, sunsets are this way, moving that way for 6 months, and then the sun will finally set over there at the equinox, and then it'll start moving back. For 6 months. And you not only look at the sun to get your direction, you have to know what day it is. Well, what do you do when the sun is down? Well, now the real mysterious stuff starts. They're sailing from the east to the west. The North Star is up there. Now, the North Star is not the biggest star in the sky, Polaris. In fact, it's hard to find. It's a dim star. You wouldn't know it if you didn't know where to find it. The North Star is the one star in the night sky that does not seem to move. All the rest of the constellations, all of them together, they turn this way. Why is that? Because the earth is turning towards them. And it looks like they're all moving over us. But the earth's revolution axis points right at that one little star up there that they call the North Star. And therefore, it seems like all the stars are whirling around that one little star. How do you find it? How do you know which is the true North Star? Well, you can't find it unless you know how to find Ursa Major, the Big Bear, also called the Big Dipper. You also have to know how to find the constellation Cassiopeia, the woman in the chair. She looks like a big lopsided W. These stars, boom, 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 boom. Yeah, and that's from an old Greco-Ethiopian myth. Cassiopeia was the beautiful queen of Ethiopia, who boasted too much about her beauty, and so the gods chained her to her throne in the sky to sit forever. There's Cassiopeia, there's the North Star. You don't know it until you look for the next big constellation over here, and that's the Big Dipper, or also called the Big Bear. And you know the Big Dipper is shaped like a drinking gourd, right? And it's got a handle, star, 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 star form the handle, and then star, 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 and kind of a square form the ladle. The bottom 2 stars of that ladle point, if you line them up in your sight. There's the Big Dipper. There are the bottom 2 stars. They point right at the North Star, right across from Cassiopeia's central angle of the Lady of the Chair. And that's how you know which star is the North Star. How many people have I stood with out in the dark and they say, oh, just look what a night. That's the North Star there. And I say, you're pointing south. Why do you think that's the North? Well, it's just the brightest. I say, no, that's the Dog Star. This way would be north. So they turn. Which one is the North Star? And they point to all kind of things. Regal, one of the feet of Orion. Some of them point to Betelgeuse, which is another bright star. They point to all kind of things because they think the North Star is going to be the brightest. But it's anything but. The only thing that determines the North Star is that it's the one that never moves. Now, if you don't know that, you'll be lost sailing at night. That's how you determine direction, which way is north, but it also determines, it becomes your great clock. If you know what season of the year it is, actually what week and day of the year it is, you'll know where these other stars are rising and setting as they all whirl around that one little point. Am I making sense to any of you? And if you're really good at navigation and dead reckoning, you can tell how fast your boat is moving along the water in relationship to these stars at a particular hour and minute. It's quite complicated. That's what they're asking. King Solomon has asked that some Israelite boys be taught dead reckoning, day and night navigation. And it's going to be quite a skill for them to learn. Is this interesting to any of you? Can you imagine it in those days? Imagine those men in the Pacific Ocean, the ancestors of the Maoris and the Hawaiians, those Polynesian men who sailed probably from Malaysia or the coasts of Japan sometime after the days of Noah, and sailed all across the Pacific with nothing but open rafts and square sails. And they brought their culture, the Polynesian culture, out and scattered all over the Pacific. Thor Heyerdahl proved that it could be done by building one of those wooden rafts and sailing it across the Pacific. Back when was that? About 1959. The Kon-Tiki is what he called it. You can read books about the voyage of the Kon-Tiki. Can you imagine men like that sailing without radios, just alone on a boat, 50 men on a giant raft, heading out toward the east across the mightiest ocean on earth, the Pacific? In Solomon's time, these guys are learning a little more and may have learned from ancient navigators like them. One of my companions knew something about astronomy, but had never been called upon to use it. The two others knew nothing about it, but were willing to learn. The ensign dismissed them. I and the other had been taking special notice of the navigator's work and his strange science. He asked the two of us why we might like to try for the position. "Well, I would like to better my lot, sir," said my companion. "I've got a better head on me than for mere deck chores. You'll find me more suited than the rest of the rabble out there." He grinned at the ensign, who returned an impassible stare. The ensign then turned to me. "How about you? Why might you like to be a navigator's apprentice?" I paused for a moment. "I cannot say I'm up for the job, sir, but I sure love to learn it. I have watched the navigator at the bow. I am astonished at what he does. I know little of the stars. I would like to learn position reckoning by them, sir." "All right," he said. "I'll talk with the captain about both of you young men. One of you will be called to the bow when your chores are finished, and if that one does not meet the navigator's esteem, then we'll try the other one of you." At first evening watch, I was tapped on the shoulder and brought aforeship. The navigator stood in the bow, viewing the horizon. Without looking up to regard my salute, he handed me a papyrus scroll. "Tell me what this is." I squatted low in the gunwales and unrolled it under his little flickering lamp. It was a strange drawing. On the paper's top half was an assortment, seemingly drawn in disorder, of small spots. Next to each spot was a letter, the same letters the Phoenicians used. Under them were a jagged line and a few irregular closed shapes. Along the line and in the shapes were words I did not know. The bottom half of the paper was filled with 4 columns of close, small writing. I noticed the columns were lists of the same letters beside the spots, but since I don't read the Phoenician alphabet, I had no knowledge of their meaning. They were followed by words, some of which were the same words I saw written in the shapes in the north part of the upper part of the paper. I puzzled over this for some time. I often did watch the navigator scanning sky and horizon while making notes on papers, or putting his eye, and I'm not going to keep you all much longer, putting his eye to a curious cross-shaped device. It had a weighted string hung from it. He aimed it at something in the sky. I knew this drawing had to do with the stars. I looked up, shielding my eyes from the lamplight. I gazed at the great field of stars in the black sky. It took me a while comparing the spots on the paper to the patterns of principal stars above me. At last, I got it. He was looking at a map of the stars with letters next to them in the Phoenician alphabet that indicated where in the column down below would be the season in which that particular star would be at its zenith at midnight. And the young man knew nothing of this stuff, but had the acumen to figure it out when the navigator turns to him. Now, we're going to pick up with that next week. Let me just talk a little bit about terms. Has this been interesting to you? This guy says, I want to learn to be a navigator. Well, there are very few guys who started by chopping trees down who very soon in the voyage begin to learn dead reckoning navigation. It's extremely complex, but he wants to learn it. Now, this too is part of sakal, the willingness to try anything. That's one of the factors of prudence. So I mentioned a couple of things. There are 4 kinds of ropes on a ship. You might like them. They are halyards, or halyards, and stays. They're just ropes. But these words describe their purposes, halyards and stays. And then 2 more kinds of ropes on a ship. You don't have to learn these. I just want to talk a minute about the complexities of it. There are sheets and shrouds. And those are all ropes. A rope called a sheet and a rope called a shroud. Some of these hold the mast up from the top. Shrouds, here's the front of the ship that's tossing in and out of waves. The shrouds hold the mast up straight this way so it won't fall back. And there's a couple of shrouds on most ships. Some have several. And then the stays hold the mast from moving from side to side because they're fastened to the sides of the ship down below on cleats. No one is to touch a shroud or a stay while the ship's in motion. It could make the mast fall over. Some foolish sailor untying a shroud line or a stay line could make the mast crack. It would be absolute disaster. And then, of course, as I said, there are sheets and halyards. And you ever heard the word halyard before? You ever watched any old ship movies? If you're interested in this stuff, go watch Moby Dick, the 1959 version. It's the best one. Go watch that with Gregory Peck. Go watch Master and Commander, about English sailfaring, and a few other pretty neat ones. The Mutiny on the Bounty is a good one, and you'll learn some of these ideas about old ship traveling, if that matters to you at all. If you want to look at a movie that's got a pretty good set of scenes about ancient ship traveling, there's a good 30 minutes of Ben-Hur with Charlton Heston that really the detail shows a lot about how that kind of stuff worked. Sheets are used for exactly what they sound like. The sails, the sheets of the sails, they're tied to the corners of the sails, and then there's a rope that goes on the other end. And if you want to roll the sail up, you pull on that one. That's a sheet, and it rolls the sail up. Of course, these have to be loosed for that to happen. And if you want to unroll it, you pull these, and you make sure those are loose, and the sail will flurry out. Those are called sheets. But halyards, these sails are attached to yard arms, also called spars. They're made of wood. And halyards, that literally means hauling a yard. And these are very heavy lines, and a group of men work on either side to haul that massive yard up that the sails can be hung from. And sometimes that yard has to be steered creakingly from one angle to another during tacking and the motion of the ship. And sometimes it has to be actually turned this way in very strange wind occurrences. So halyards, I just mentioned that because it's navigational language, and you might come upon it sometime and find some interest in that. Last thing I want to say, just as I'm closing, what do you think that cross-shaped instrument is? It has a weighted string on it that can swing back and forth. It's tied at the top, and the guy looks across it, points it at a star, and looks right across. Nowadays, we would call it a sextant. It's got a telescope that you look through and focus on a particular star, and then you set a miter gauge, depending on what time of year it is, and then another gauge on what time of day it is, and that thing will swing down that string, and you read the gauge at the bottom. It's on a little arc, and you read the number of it, and it'll tell you exactly where you are on planet Earth. Now, that's called a sextant nowadays. It's a rather complicated instrument, but they had ancient versions of it that have been found from more than 3,000 years ago, which was Solomon's time. So sailors were working with, how can we, a lot of complex work dealing with time, latitude, longitude, to figure out exactly where you are and how fast you are moving. So that's enough for tonight. We'll get into better stuff in the story, I promise you. Praise God, this hadn't been too exciting yet. Oh, but we've got pirate battles coming up and hurricanes and different stuff. And in each one, our sailor is learning another aspect of wisdom. Thank you so much for your time and attention. I've asked Brother James, should I just be reading stuff from this book I've written? That sounds, but on the other hand, I've got several people who have told me from years, Brother Pat, you need to make an audio book of all the books you've written. I haven't even published them yet, but you ought to read them. If you read them, just sit down and read them out loud. But then, when I do read them to groups, not many show up to hear. But I guess that might be true of any lecturer who reads from his own writings. You watch these, you attend some of these lectures given by historians or authors, and you go to hear it in some state library somewhere, and there are no more people there to hear him, the famous guy, than I've got here to hear me tonight. So I guess that's just the way it goes. But anyway, we're getting this stuff down. If you feel like I need to just set this aside for a few weeks and get back to just preaching something out of the Bible, I'll be glad to do it. But I'll always have it in the back of my scheming little brain to get back to reading this to you sooner or later. Thank you for your attention. God bless you. I love you. And be blessed all week. Brother James.